Serenity Valley Stories introduces Heart of the Shadow Hollow. The last time I'd visited my Aunt Ellen was years ago, back when my mother was still alive. The small town of Shadow Hollow, nestled deep within the mountains, had always felt like a place untouched by time. The dense forest that surrounded it, the winding dirt roads, and the old, crumbling buildings made it seem like a town forgotten by the rest of the world. When Aunt Ellen called, her voice shaky and urgent, asking me to visit her, I didn't hesitate. The town's isolation had become more pronounced over the years, and I felt guilty for not visiting more often. So, I packed my bags and drove through the winding roads, the forest growing denser as I approached the town. The air in Shadow Hollow was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. A cold wind whipped through the trees, rustling the leaves and making the branches sway like ancient, gnarled hands reaching for the sky. The town itself was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the occasional creak of an old building or the distant call of a crow. Aunt Ellen's house stood at the edge of town, near the forest line. It was an old, two-story house with peeling paint and windows that seemed to stare back at you like hollow eyes. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that the house looked even more dilapidated than I remembered. When I knocked on the door, it creaked open slowly, revealing the dimly lit interior. The air inside was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and something else I couldn't quite place, a sharp, metallic odor that sent a shiver down my spine. "Aunt Ellen!" I called out, stepping inside. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. "I'm here, child," her voice came from the back of the house, weak and tremulous. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing through the narrow hallway. When I reached the small living room, I found her sitting in an old rocking chair by the fireplace. She looked frail, her once vibrant hair now a dull gray, her skin pale and almost translucent. "You came," she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you." I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. It was cold, and I could feel her trembling. "Of course I came, Aunt Ellen. What's wrong? You sounded so scared on the phone." Her eyes darted around the room, as if she was afraid someone, or something, might be listening. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something terrible has been happening in this town." A chill ran down my spine as she spoke, her words sending a wave of unease through me. She told me about the strange occurrences that had been plaguing the town, people falling ill for no apparent reason, strange shadows moving through the trees at night, and the sound of whispers carried on the wind. "But it's more than that," she continued, her voice trembling. "It's the Ravenmocker. It's come back." The name sent a jolt of fear through me. I had heard the stories when I was a child, tales of a malevolent spirit from Cherokee folklore that stole the hearts of the dying to extend its own life. The Ravenmocker was said to be invisible, able to mimic voices and manipulate its surroundings to confuse and terrify its victims. "Aunt Ellen, those are just stories," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the look in her eyes told me she believed every word. "No, child," she insisted, gripping my hand tightly. "It's real. I've seen it. I've heard it whispering my name at night, felt its cold breath on my neck. It's here, and it won't stop until it takes what it wants." I wanted to dismiss her fears, to tell her that it was just her imagination, but the fear in her eyes was all too real. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in this town. That night, as I lay in the old, creaking bed in the guest room, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the house seemed to groan with each gust. I could hear the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settled. But there was something else, too, a faint whisper, barely audible, as if someone was speaking just beyond the edge of my hearing. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, and I could make out words, my name, repeated over and over again, in a voice that wasn't quite human. My heart pounded in my chest as I threw off the covers and stepped onto the cold, wooden floor. I moved toward the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I peered out into the night. The forest loomed just beyond the edge of the yard, the trees swaying in the wind. And there, just at the tree line, I saw something move, something dark and shapeless, slipping between the trees like a shadow. A sense of dread washed over me as the whispering grew louder, more insistent. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the light switch. But when I flipped it, nothing happened. The room remained cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the pale moon filtering through the curtains. "Aunt Ellen!" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the sound of the wind and the whispering that seemed to come from all around me. I stumbled out of the room, my footsteps echoing through the empty house. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the fireplace in the living room. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw Aunt Ellen's rocking chair, but it was empty. "Aunt Ellen!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. I ran to the front door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut, trapping me inside. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, and I could feel the cold breath of something behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room and the shadows that seemed to dance in the flickering light of the fireplace. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, like the sound of an animal in pain. It echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls, and I knew in that moment that Aunt Ellen had been right. The Ravenmocker was here, and it had come for me. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, as the growling grew louder, more menacing. I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent, as it closed in on me. The room seemed to spin, the shadows twisting and warping as the Ravenmocker toyed with my senses, trying to drive me mad with fear. But I couldn't let it win. I had to find Aunt Ellen, had to get us both out of this nightmare. I stumbled toward the living room, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of her. And then I saw it, a dark shape moving in the corner of the room, just out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there it was, a figure, tall and shadowy, with eyes that glowed like embers. It stood there, watching me, its face hidden in darkness, but I could feel its gaze, cold and calculating, as it studied me. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're just a story." The figure stepped closer, and I could see it more clearly now, a twisted, humanoid shape with long, bony fingers and a mouth filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It grinned at me, a malicious, predatory grin that sent a wave of terror through me. "Oh, but I am real," it hissed, its voice a low, rasping whisper. "And I've waited a long time for someone like you." I backed away, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way out. But the Ravenmocker was too fast, too powerful. It moved with a speed that defied logic, appearing in front of me in an instant, its cold, bony fingers wrapping around my throat. I gasped for breath, my vision swimming as it tightened its grip, its eyes glowing with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. "Your heart will be mine," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. But then, something strange happened. A warm light began to glow from the amulet I wore around my neck, an old piece of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. The light grew brighter, enveloping me in a protective warmth that seemed to push the Ravenmocker back. It hissed in anger, releasing its grip on me as it recoiled from the light. I could see its form beginning to waver, becoming less solid, as if the light was driving it away. "Leave this place!" I shouted, my voice stronger now. "You have no power here." The Ravenmocker let out a shriek of rage, its form twisting and writhing as it was forced back into the shadows. The light from the amulet grew even brighter, filling the room with a blinding radiance, and then, with one final scream, the Ravenmocker was gone. The house fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends, and check out the other stories on the channel.